This week, something happened inside a government document that almost nobody is talking about. And if you are retired or planning to retire in the next decade, what's buried in this report could shrink your pension check by hundreds of dollars every single month. There are two things you need to understand right now. One is a hard deadline with a specific year attached to it, a year that just moved closer. And the other is actually good news, but it comes with a catch that most people completely miss, and that catch could cost you more than the good news is worth. Your bank didn't send you a letter about this. The financial news channels didn't lead with it. And the government certainly isn't advertising it. But this information is real, it's documented, and it directly affects every single person in this country who receives a pension, a retirement benefit, or who is counting on one in the years ahead. Stay with me because both of these stories are going to matter to you personally, and I'm going to give you the exact numbers so you can see precisely what this means for your own situation. Before we get into it, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to translate dense government reports and financial data into plain language that you can actually use. If that's useful to you, consider subscribing right now, because what we're about to discuss is part of an ongoing story that is going to keep developing over the next several months, and you'll want to be here when the next piece lands. Alright, let's start with story 1. On June 17th of this year, the Board of Trustees for the Federal Pension System released their annual report. This is not an opinion piece. This is not a think tank estimate. This is the official, legally mandated financial assessment of the retirement fund that tens of millions of Americans depend on, signed off by the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Labor, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services. This document is produced every single year, and it contains a number that most retirees have never heard of, but that may be the most important number in their financial lives. That number is the depletion date. Here is what the depletion date means, and here is why it matters more than almost anything else you will read about your retirement this year. The pension trust fund, the pool of money from which your monthly benefit is paid, does not have unlimited reserves. It is funded by contributions from working people, and those contributions are currently sufficient. But there is a point in the future, a specific projected year, at which incoming contributions will no longer be enough to cover all the payments that are owed. When that happens, benefits do not disappear entirely, but they get cut automatically by law unless Congress acts to prevent it. And the trustees just moved that projected date forward. Again, last year's report projected the depletion date at 2034. This year's report moved it to 2032, 2 years closer in a single 12-month period. And this is not the first time this has happened. Over the last several years, that date has been creeping forward year after year, driven by demographic shifts, by a shrinking ratio of working contributors to retired recipients, and by legislative decisions that have reduced the funding flowing into the system. What that means for you is simple, and it is serious. The window between now and that deadline is getting smaller, and right now, Congress has done nothing to address it. So let's talk about what actually happens in 2032, because this is where a lot of coverage gets it completely wrong, and getting it wrong could lead you to make very bad decisions about your retirement timing. In 2032, if nothing changes legislatively, benefits will not go to zero. They will be cut to approximately 79% of the currently scheduled amount. That is the trustees' own projection. 79 cents on every dollar you are currently owed. And that number, 79%, translates very differently depending on where you fall in the benefit range, so let's go through the math together because this is where it gets real. If your monthly pension benefit is $1,500, a 21% cut means you lose $315 every single month. That is $3,780 per year, gone. If your benefit is closer to the average, right around $2,100 per month, a 21% reduction takes $441 off the top. Every month. That's over $5,000 a year. And if you are receiving $2,500 a month, you are looking at a monthly loss of $525. More than $6,000 a year in benefits that were promised to you, that you planned around, that you structured your entire retirement budget to include, gone unless Congress acts. Now I want to be precise here, because precision matters when we're talking about your money. Nothing changes this year. Nothing changes next year. The benefit you receive this month is secure. The question is what happens as we approach that 2032 window, and more importantly, what you do between now and then. If you are already receiving benefits, the most important thing you can do right now is contact your congressional representatives, both senators and your House member, and make clear that this issue is a priority. Elected officials respond to constituent pressure, And there is documented historical precedent for Congress acting on this exact problem when enough people make noise. The 1983 reforms happened because the political cost of inaction became too high. If you have not yet claimed your benefit, and you are in the range where you have a choice about when to start, the 2032 depletion date is now a variable in that claiming strategy. Some financial planners are beginning to recommend that clients model their retirement income using the 79% figure as a stress test scenario, rather than assuming the full benefit. That doesn't mean you should claim early in a panic, but it does mean you should be running the numbers with a qualified advisor who understands what this report actually says. And if you are still a decade or more away from retirement, this is the moment to start treating your retirement savings as your primary safety net, not your pension as your primary and your savings as a backup. That mental shift matters. Alright, now let's move to story 2, and this one starts as genuinely good news. So let's take a breath because we're about to talk about money going up instead of down. Every year, pension benefits are adjusted to account for inflation. This is called the cost of living adjustment or COLA. The way it's calculated is based on a specific measure of inflation, the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, typically abbreviated as CPIW. The government measures inflation in the third quarter of each year, July, August, and September, and uses that data to set the COLA that goes into effect the following January. The official 2026 COLA number won't be announced until October, but we already have enough data to make a reasonably informed projection, and the projections are coming in positive. One of the most widely cited independent analysts on this issue, the Senior Pensioners Advocacy Group, has released their preliminary estimate for the 2026 COLA, and they are projecting an adjustment in the range of 2.6%. A separate analysis puts the number slightly lower, around 2.3%. There is still 1 month of data to collect before the official calculation is complete, so both of those figures could shift. But even taking the more conservative estimate, we are looking at a meaningful increase, and here is what that means in real dollar terms. If your current monthly benefit is $1,500, a 2.6% COLA adds $39 per month. That's $468 in additional income over the course of a year. If you are receiving $2,100 per month, the same 2.6% adjustment adds $54.60 monthly, just over $655 per year. At $2,500 per month, you are looking at $65 more every month, or $780 over 12 months. Compare that to last year when the COLA adjustment came in at 2.5%. These new projections are marginally higher, which means recipients would see a slightly larger adjustment than they did going into 2025. That is unambiguously good news, and it's worth acknowledging before we get to the part that complicates it. Because here is the catch. And this is the part that almost nobody talks about because it requires holding two numbers in your head at the same time. The COLA is designed to keep your purchasing power stable. That is its entire purpose. But there is a structural problem with how it is calculated, a problem that researchers have documented for years, and it means the COLA consistently underestimates the actual inflation experienced by retirees specifically. Here is why. The CPIW, the index used to calculate your COLA, measures the spending patterns of urban wage earners, people who are actively working. Working people and retired people do not spend their money the same way. Retirees spend a significantly larger portion of their income on healthcare, on prescription medications, on housing costs, and on utilities. These categories have been rising in price faster than the overall inflation index. So when the government calculates a 2.6% COLA based on a basket of goods that doesn't accurately reflect what you actually buy, the math starts to break down. The Senior Pensioners Advocacy Group tracks what they call the real cost increase for a typical retiree household, and their most recent data shows that actual expenses for retired Americans are rising at a rate closer to 3.4% per year when you wait for healthcare and housing costs appropriately. Which means a 2.6% COLA, on a $2,100 benefit, gives you roughly $54 more per month. But your actual costs on the same time scale are rising by approximately $71 per month. You are receiving a raise of $54 while your bills are going up by $71. The net result is that you are losing ground, quietly, invisibly, and completely legally every single year. This is not a criticism of any particular administration. This structural mismatch has existed across Republican and Democratic governments for decades. But it is the reason why so many retirees who did everything right, who saved, who planned, who waited to claim, who followed all the advice, still find themselves feeling financially squeezed despite receiving annual increases. The increase is real. The purchasing power loss is also real. And the second number is bigger than the first. What can be done about it? There are legislative proposals, the CPIE, an index specifically designed to track elderly spending patterns, that have been introduced in Congress multiple times. If that index were used instead of the CPIW, COLA adjustments would more accurately reflect the inflation retirees actually experience. That bill has not passed, but the political support for it has been growing, and given that roughly 44% of retired Americans now rely on their pension benefit for more than 90% of their total income, a figure that has increased for 3 consecutive years, the pressure on legislators to address this is not going away. 44%. That is not a fringe population. That is nearly half of all retirees in this country living within a margin of error of their monthly check. And that number is growing, which means the combination of a moving depletion deadline and a systematic undercount of real inflation is not an abstract policy problem. It is a compound financial pressure on tens of millions of households, building year over year, visible in the data, and mostly invisible in the headlines. Here is where things stand right now and what to watch. The official 2026 COLA announcement comes in October. Between now and then, we'll get the final month of CPIW data, which could push the estimate slightly higher or slightly lower than the 2.6% figure we discussed today. I will cover that announcement the moment it drops, with full dollar calculations at every benefit level. So make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. On the depletion date question, the next major legislative development to watch is whether a budget reconciliation process in Congress includes any provision to address the funding shortfall. Historically, these provisions don't appear until the political pressure is intense enough, and with 2032 now on the official trustees timeline rather than 2034, that pressure has measurably increased. In the meantime, the single most useful thing you can do today is know your number. Log into your account on the government benefits portal, find your current projected monthly benefit, and run it through the 79% scenario. Write down what that cut would mean for your specific monthly budget. Not because it is certain to happen, it is not certain, but because the people who have already modeled that scenario will be far better positioned to respond quickly if legislation fails to materialize. Hope is not a financial plan. Preparation is. Both of these stories, the depletion timeline and the COLA calculation problem, are going to continue developing over the next several months, and they are connected in ways that the individual headlines rarely make clear. A system under funding pressure is also a system where benefit cuts and inadequate inflation adjustments can compound against each other simultaneously. Understanding that connection is not pessimism. It is the kind of clear-eyed reading of official data that lets you make better decisions about your own life. That is what we do here. If this was useful to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, a family member, a spouse, a friend who is already retired or getting close. And if you have questions about how these numbers apply to your specific situation, leave them in the comments below. I read them and I use them to guide what we cover next. The official COLA number lands in October. We'll be here when it does.